breathe out. And breathe in.
When Alstom, see chit, and eight ans squachalton eight chalcelam.
And breathe out.
Quote oath to mail, tweet and with tina.
It seems to me the future is about our stories, and how we connect with each other, and how we maintain those connections across generations.
I am Fiona Rare, and I am the Artistic Director of Gen Y Media.
And I'm Tara Mahoney, I'm the Creative Director of Gen Y Media. People often ask us, oh, well, why don't young people vote and why aren't they engaged? And they're the most disengaged generation ever.
I'm very honored to be here, to welcome you all to Coast Salish territory.
I often say, they're just engaging in different ways.
There's a language and culture that came from this place that still is here, and we're working very hard to bring it back.
I look to your generation from a younger generation, and I'm in some ways very grateful, and in some ways very angry.
Well, tonight, the Rio Theatre hosts an election forum for young voters. It's part of a series called the Bring Your Boomers Election Forum.
My name is Takaya Blaney. I'm 11 years old and I'm from the Sliman Nation.
I believe it's unfair to dismiss young people as apathetic. Politics, for many people, is confusing, it's corrupt, it's disconnected, it's boring, and it's a language of sound bites and empty promises.
Just to sort of pick up on the intergenerational theme.
You know, the most common question I get from young people to me is, look, what's the most important issue we face?
What is the most important issue we face?
And the biggest issue we face is this thing here, the 2-kilogram organ buried deep in our skulls. It's the way we look at the world and see it, because that's what determines the way we act.
Next up, we have this fantastic intergenerational dialogue. I'm sure it's going to be inspiring for everybody.
We've been asked tonight to ask questions of one another that are on these sort of 5 topics of community, justice, the environmentalism, technology, and the future.
Friends, we are at an important moment in history.
When we came up with this idea for an intergenerational dialogue, and it was kind of had a funny title, like Bring Your Boomers, we were almost joking, but then we were like, hey, that's actually a really good title. And we thought that people would come because it's light and celebratory, and it's not attached to a serious ideology that could scare people away.
I was very upset. I always am.
We try to incorporate culture as much as possible, so dance and music and art and poetry and theater, so that we're attracting an audience who might not otherwise come to a politically oriented conversation, to engage the unengaged.
What can your generation teach my generation about your battle?
I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by transformative change.
I became an activist with my 10-month-old baby in the back of our 1964 forestry vehicle. I became an activist because I was born a woman. Catherine Charles Wary married a white man with steel on the end of his tongue, silver embedded under his fingernails, work breathing out of his lungs.
We had our first Bring Your Boomers in a small venue, and it sold out. And then we had our second one at double that capacity, and that sold out. What that tells us is that there's an appetite for this conversation in Vancouver.
What is your legacy going to be to your ancestors when you're finished with this challenge?
That's a hell of a question.
There's this really interesting thing that happens between generations when they're learning things about each other that they didn't know before, where there's this sort of learning tension that's created. Those moments, I think, are what captivates the audience and what you remember most after it's over.
I think one of the mistakes that was made, frankly, by the women's movement, myself included, in the early days of the equality movement was to think that all women experienced inequality in the same way. And so therefore, white middle-class law professors could design an equality agenda that would suit all women. And this was not a good assumption.
Art has to have this relationship to politics, right? Do you think that should be an essential character of art?
I think art in its most pure state is not fundamentally driven by the need to change politics. I think that that does happen, but I think it happens because of the fundamental motif to make the world a better place, not because they're trying to sway politics one way or the other. What I've noticed is that when non-preachy indirect action is taken, sometimes the message is listened to by those who might otherwise have not listened.
The more we tweet, the more we show off and broadcast ourselves, the more we underline the kind of illusion of individual strength.
You take on subjects that are really controversial, and my question is, do you consider yourself to be an activist filmmaker?
No, I'm not. A lot of times, the people in my films are activists, because I find activists really interesting. Often they're on the cusp of taking action to somehow or another wrest some kind of control over their own life. And for a filmmaker, that means they're going to move, there's going to be action, there's going to be, the story is going to move forward. I'll have something to film.
I think intergenerational dialogue to me means common understanding, forgiveness, reconciliation, humor, wanting to work together, emotional connection.
Tonight is amazing, and this means a great deal to me to be in this room. And I have to tell you that right now, filmmakers like Nimisha and myself are in a lot of trouble.
The boomer generation did get carried away with the tremendous economic opportunities that presented themselves, the whole approach to the developing a consumer economy. And it's true, this is a horrible legacy that the boomer generation, combined with others that preceded it, has left with you, because we're now at a tipping point, I think. And so certain changes in lifestyle will have to be made, which may or may not be very comfortable changes that your generation is going to have to undertake.
I think my generation has left behind a real shitload of legacy.
We've done a very bad job. My generation, the boomers, we partied like there was no tomorrow. Man, did we live it up. We lived like kings and queens, and it never occurred to us what we were leaving for future generations. And what I see my life is to have learned from my mistakes, to pass it on, but it's the young people who have everything at stake. And with the muscle power of youth, because your entire lives are going to be determined by what we do or do not do now. You've got to take what lessons we've learned and then power your way. And we'll be there. We owe it to you guys to do something, to help you.
But there's many in my generation as well who are resigned to like a self-oriented, materialistic, anthropocentric construct, and that, yeah, the message will take, I hope.
Well, but it's not so much resigned as seduced.
Well, yeah.
You know,
yeah,
it's a very seductive thing to have your iPhone or your iPad or whatever. It's very seductive.
Because now the rules are changing, and things that were not even conceivable 5 or 10 years ago are on the table. And I think one of the things that made activism so difficult was the systems that were in place were so strong and concrete, and just battering against them felt so hopeless. Well, even those systems are on the table now. So we could change it all. And people are starting to get the idea that we could change all of this whole thing, and we just have to do it together. And as that idea starts to percolate through people's consciousness, I think the fertility of change consciousness becomes more and more rewarding.
My experience is young people are breaking through in a way that my generation never did. And so once they get a taste of making a difference in the world with others, it's intoxicating, and then they don't go back.
Now more than ever, it seems that we need to come together as citizens across generations to discuss how we transform society to deal with massive issues like climate change.
They gave me this sort of unenviable task, and that was to try to describe a vision for the future.
We thought there were forests forever. We thought there was fossil fuels forever. We thought there was clean water forever and clean air forever. And we know that that is just simply not true.
I always grew up, and I'm still growing up, with the teachings from my kukpa and my chichia. My kukpa, my grandfather, and my chichia, my grandmother. And they taught me that the land is sacred and the water is sacred and the air is sacred, and we need to respect what's on that land.
My grandma schools me in skinning, as an elder will do. Just makes me look like a total fool. Grandma showed me how to gut it, how to skin it, how to take it all apart, and then Grandpa showed me how to cook it. And one of the things they did is they took the head and the front paws off, and he put them together, and he said a certain thing, and we put them back in the water. And that was the most profound transition, because he taught me how to do this right. And one of the things you have to say is essentially, we give you back so that you can be reborn again. You come to us again. And that was beautiful. But while we're doing it, there's trucks and there's quads and there's flares in the distance.
What you're learning from that experience with the beaver just so connects us back to the real world. And we need that. Your elders play that role in being your pipeline to the past and what it used to be like. I think that's the thing that we in the dominant society are really suffering from now, because we tend to think of old people as, get them out of here, go down to Florida, but they don't know how to use an ATM, or they, we think of them as really out of it. They're not in our culture anymore, and they're irrelevant, really. Whereas you still have that.
I'm privileged to have that.
You are.
And what I'm aware of is that, we're on an industrial road, basically, and we're driving forward, and as we keep driving, we're seeing these stop signs, and we're seeing yield signs and dead-end signs and wrong way signs, and as we keep driving, our driving wheel just gets slacker and slacker, and our brakes eventually almost stop working. And one day we're gonna hit that cliff and we're gonna fall, but the thing is, we still have time to turn around.
We have an opportunity to learn from each other, build relationships with each other, and then please get on the streets. We have to push back. We have to let the government know that what they are approving should not be approved. What they're saying is okay is not okay.
We can't have a $14 billion tourism economy that's rooted in this branding of the greenest city and the greatest place on earth, and be Port McMurray.
I think people are kind of uneasy about the way things are right now, and they want to talk.
There were two events in particular where people start yelling things out from the audience, and it almost turns into a bit of mayhem, it seems, for a second. But then you realize that it's not mayhem. People are just totally comfortable just saying what they feel, which is pretty cool. You don't experience that at a lot of events.
It's very rare for young people to speak directly to politicians in a forum that's designed for them, where they feel comfortable. And we created that forum with Bring Your Boomers for.
My question is, how do you propose to be accountable to this demographic?
So what do you intend to do to give hope to people like myself who don't have much hope?
The question is, what is that next step? Who makes those next decisions?
We had the young people right on stage with the politicians, so it was kind of putting them as equals.
I can't vote, and I don't actually have the power to make decisions with regards to government, but the current decisions being made by the BC government have drastic impacts on my friends and I and our future.
We seem to continue with this business as usual attitude when, we've got massive challenges such as climate change, at our doorstep. What do you think it's going to take to, try and get us out of that business as usual mindset?
I think one of the biggest mistakes we make is we work our butts off to get somebody elected, and then we're like, okay, I got to get back to legitimately pressing issues around children, school, getting from point A to point B, getting to work on time, whatever it is, right? But really, you need people there every single day in big numbers fighting for these changes. You need big numbers fighting for big changes, right? More often than not, my experience is we believe will fail, so we silence our own voices. And that is, it's the biggest shame, right, of modern democracies, is that we choose not to vote, we choose not to put letters in, we choose not to organize because we believe we're going to fail.
And one of the best things that could happen out of Bring Your Boomers is like a cultural shift around civic engagement and around intergenerational relationships, and maybe crushing some of those stereotypes that exist that get offered to us in the media. They aren't true and they aren't helpful, and they don't provide for a constructive conversation.
We are paying attention. Climate change is not a debate any longer.
That's one of the most important topics of our generation. And how are we supposed to address it if the government in power doesn't have anybody of our generation there?
Do you guys understand that the place that I come from is the gas tank for this province?
I think everyone here wants the same thing. Nobody wants to see oil splashed up on the beaches anywhere.
I don't think it's a mystery how we need to address climate change in a courageous fashion. I think the problem is that the vested interests that own the political parties won't allow it to happen.
I cannot describe how difficult it is to hear that once again we have to give it up so that there can be an economic future, even in transition. I understand that our territory has so much to give this province and to the world, yet what is given is only resources, and we have profound ideas about how we relate to the natural world. We have, beautiful ways of living, songs, stories, traditions, and so as good as it is to hear these policies and these prognostications about climate change and those kinds of things, I can't help but feel as if the fundamental issues of justice, the fundamental issues of what's been done, not what will be done, but what's been done already, haven't really been addressed. And it's interesting. We were remarking about this earlier. It's interesting that all of us up here have inherited something. If you're going to form government, you've inherited the problems of the past. As a young person, I've inherited the problems of people before me.
In the last federal election, those under 30, only about a third of them voted relative to 2/3 of people over 30.
We need courage. And the way that I would suggest that we get people involved in politics is to make it a courageous and honorable enterprise again. And in order to do that, the political parties need to stop doing what they do in terms of muzzling the system and turning it into a chess game that is more focused on the next election than it is on the next generation.
4 words: vote for climate action, because the people who need it most can't do it.
I have to tell you 3 young people that I'm completely moved by what you've said. In some ways, I don't have answers. I've got lots of questions, as well as you.
Getting young people engaged in politics and engaged in the political process is a huge undertaking and challenge. And so the more that we can create those forums that make politics real to people, the better.
The question is, how do we, as individuals, collectivize enough in a way whereby we can retain our sense of individuality, but actually work together to have some sort of a common purpose to challenge, dominant ideologies.
If you play by the rules, you're hooped. So you might as well take the biggest artistic leap of your life right now.
I'm stepping away from being in the front now, but I think not enough people my age are willing to do that, to step aside.
This song is called Earth Revolution. It's about not waiting for change to come, but being the change, and specifically my generation as well, because the corporations and the companies that are mining and drilling the holes in the future, they have to hand down the land to my generation, and what will they give us? So it's about my generation and all generations standing up and actually being that change before it's too late. 'Cause there won't be tomorrow. If we don't change today, we're generation now, children of the future, Earth revolution. Creation's crying.
If we don't change today, we're generation now, children of the future, Earth revolution. Creation's crying out, and I can feel the pain. I can walk away. So I will do my part to fix what's broken, give back what we're taking, hope for the dawn of a new day. Calling out to each and every person, join me in the earth.